Now our distinguished presenter today is Dr. James Tabor, professor and chair of the Department of Religious Studies at UNC Charlotte. His areas of specialty are the ancient texts related to Christian origins and ancient Judaism. He has done extensive field work in archaeology in Jordan and Israel, where he serves as co-director of the Mount Zion excavation in Jerusalem. In 1995, he testified before Congress about the Waco tragedy, about the kind of theology that religious sects like the Branch Davidians operate with. He's the author of a number of books about Jesus, Paul, and Mary, including the controversial book, The Jesus Dynasty, and last year, a translation of the book of Genesis. The title of his presentation today is Excavating Jesus: How New Archaeological Discoveries in the Holy Land Are Transforming Our Understanding of the Historical Jesus. Perhaps we will hear as well about the recent discoveries of more Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as about the Moses Sephira Dead Sea Scrolls mystery. I don't think we've ever before hosted an archaeologist, so we heartily welcome James Tabor. And as always, we thank our Zoom host, Cameron Tribble of Convergence. James, thank you for your presence today.
We had to wait a year for this, but you and I have talked quite a bit on the phone about theology and archaeology and history and even politics, if you know Steve. Anyway, one little correction I want to make. I'm not chair currently of the department. I was happily chair from 2004 to, I think it was 2015. And theoretically, I'm not an archaeologist, meaning that's not my field. I'm a biblical historian, but I'll explain that as I go on. I want to also thank Richard and Nancy and wish Nancy well. Thank you for supporting this event. I'm just thrilled at the number that have signed in. I'm going to go ahead. You know, if you do archaeology, you have to do slides. And I've got a great presentation for you. I want to just try it out here, share the screen, start it up. You should get a good full screen. If Cameron, you want to confirm we're okay there before I start.
We can see it. Looks great.
Okay, great. So Excavating Jesus, it's not a title I invented. Actually, I think Dom Crossan and Jonathan Reed probably first came up with this in the recent times with a book called Excavating Jesus, which I recommend. And you can see the subtitle. What I want to talk about is how it is that taking texts in one hand and the archaeological trowel, so to speak, in the other, you can go on the ground in the Holy Land and you can discover things about Jesus. In other words, how does the material evidence combine with the archaeological evidence? Now, for years, I was just a textual scholar. I've been teaching for 40 years, and 30 of those years I've been doing the archaeology. But the first 10, I taught at Notre Dame, I taught at William and Mary. I was like any Bible teacher. I just used the text of the Bible and so forth and read about things. But beginning in 1990, I've since made 70 trips to the Holy Land, you know, a couple a year, 2 or 3 a year. And I'm going to share that with you. Here are some of the books that Steve mentioned. For this lecture, I would particularly recommend The Jesus Dynasty and The Jesus Discovery. This is not out in English yet. Notice that's actually French, Marie, but it will be out in English. They've held it back partly because of COVID things. You can find all of this and more on my website, and I do hope you'll sign up for notifications. No obligation. I never share your email or anything like that. But that way you can keep up, because literally, even this week, as Steve alluded to, the front page New York Times story about the Shapira scroll that has come back into the news. I almost want to just say, hey, let's change the topic and talk about Shapira, but we're not going to do that. Maybe I'll come back in a few months. Will the real Jesus please stand up? Here we have some images of Jesus. You can easily identify them, I think. Here's our Byzantine Jesus. Here's our Protestant Jesus. Depending on how you grew up, you might have had a picture something like this. in your bedroom growing up if you were a devout Christian. This is the Sacred Heart Roman Catholic image. This is somebody trying to say, no, wait, Jesus was Jewish. Let's make him like a Hasidic Jew. This is actually Rembrandt saying, no, he's a human. Look at that lovely human face. These guys are probably too white, but here's a guy that helps us a little bit with that. We don't know anything about this guy, but this is a Jesus formed from an ancient skull. But hey, our skulls today would look pretty different from one another. But at least it gives you sort of an idea. So how are we going to find the historical Jesus? I'm going to emphasize three main things here: that he was Jewish, that he was strategic, that he did things with a purpose that we can track, that he was messianic. By that I mean he was apocalyptic, that he thought the end was near, and he was very radical in what he put forth to people. If you think about the Apostles' Creed, born of the Virgin Mary, crucified under Pontius Pilate. I just quoted a phrase of it. What's missing? Born, crucified, buried, raised the third day. What about his life? So I've spent the last 40 years, not even counting graduate school, trying to get at what we call the historical Jesus. Now, the historical Jesus can certainly inform what we theologians sometimes call the Christ of faith. The historical Jesus is everything we know historically. And I'm going to start with places on the ground. Nazareth, everybody has heard of. You know, we even say Jesus of Nazareth. Here's some of your main texts that talk about Nazareth. What you may not know is this right here, that Netzer is a Hebrew word that's found in this famous messianic prophecy of Isaiah 11, verse 1. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. You Bible students will know that Jesse is the father of King David, and a branch will grow out of his roots. So branch and Netzer, from which we get the word Nazareth. Nazareth really means branch town. We're not sure how it got that name, but here we have Mary and Joseph going back to their own city, Nazareth. So Joseph, at least the husband, is from there, and he's now taken this woman, Mary. He's also called a Nazarene. That means someone from Branchtown. It's different from Nazarite, which is that vow you take when you grow your hair and your beard and you don't shave and so forth. You have certain dietary laws, nothing to do with that. It could be that it was called Nazareth because members of the royal family of David were known to live there, and it sort of got that nickname. I'm going to show you in a minute that it's actually a suburb of a larger town. So it might even be a district. Notice this phrase, some of you will remember. Some of Jesus's followers and later his enemies said, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Meaning it's not a well-known place. It's a very, very small town. We have small towns all over North and South Carolina. My students many times come from these towns, and sometimes I have to look them up, like, oh, where is that exactly? The story in Mark, our earliest gospel, says Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized of John in the river. Here's a map. We're going to see this map a lot. Anybody spot Nazareth? I'm moving around here. How about right there? Now this, even though that's got a red dot, places mentioned in the New Testament, this is much larger. Yaphia or Jaffa, probably never heard of it. According to Josephus, who's the historian of the first century, Yaphia or Jaffa, as it's called on this map, is the largest town in the Galilee, not the largest city. The largest city is right here, Cephas, which we're going to talk about, but it's the largest town. So Nazareth is in a little hillside village nestled in the hills that we generally call Yaphia or Jaffa. So just keep that in mind. That's how unknown it is. It's almost like a district, maybe, of the greater suburb of Yaphia, which is of the greater suburb of Cephas. Here's what it looks like today. It's not a little village today because of Jesus. It's the largest Arab town in the Holy Land, and it's made up of Christian Arabs, Jews, and Muslims. And here you can see in the very center the Church of the Basilica. This is where Mary traditionally received the message of Gabriel that you're going to become pregnant and so forth. Now, as an archaeologist and historian, I'm actually more interested in this hillside outside of Nazareth and also what's been dug in this area down here. I'm not going to talk much about that today because I've had to limit myself. I'm only covering 30 years of archaeology, folks. And so, unless you want to be here 2 or 3 hours, which maybe some of you would say, yeah, do it. But anyway, I'm going to show you the things that I know the most about. But there has been some archaeology here around the Basilica that has been including first century homes. So we know that it's a little village, but now look how it's just filled up and all the hillsides around Nazareth, they're also full. This is a 19th century painting, which gives you a little bit more of an idea of what it might have looked like before it became so congested. So if Mark Twain had traveled to Nazareth, and I think maybe he did, I'm trying to remember in his itinerary, he certainly went to Jerusalem. I think he went to Nazareth. But anyway, any traveler in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, they would have seen something like this that actually begins to make you think it might be a little closer to a village in the time of Jesus. So it helps you to just imagine at least what it was like. Now, this is looking down in the valley, looking at some of the only area that you can still explore in terms of what it was anciently, and this is called Nazareth Village. Some evangelical Christians have tried to reconstruct ancient Nazareth, and so if you ever go on a Holy Land trip, you should hope that they might include Nazareth Village because I'm just showing you one little area of it here. Now, inside Nazareth Village, one of the things they have is a carpenter shop, and I'm going to start with that because that involves some textual archaeology and some sleuthing here. Here's maybe the most important verse in Mark about the historical Jesus. Not only do we get the name of his mother and not his father, and so calling somebody the son of Mary, also his brothers, 4 brothers, up to 2 sisters, we think maybe even 3. So it's a large family that he grows up in. But here's what I want you to concentrate on. Is this not the carpenter? Because here at Nazareth Village, it's like Williamsburg or Salem. They try to demonstrate what it would have been like in the first century. And certainly a village like Nazareth would have a carpenter, maybe more than one. So here's a carpenter, and he is making tools and farm implements and doors and window frames and so forth. But I'm going to suggest to you that the Greek word used, tekton, even though we're very used to understanding it as carpenter. I mean, I see bumper stickers, Jesus was a carpenter, or my boss is a Jewish carpenter. I hate to burst that bubble. It's in Chris Christopherson's song. It's just everywhere. But tekton, you actually know this from the word architect. Architect is the chief planner or builder. Tekton really just means builder. His father, Joseph, is also a tekton, a builder. He's called son of a tekton. So the trade of Jesus might very well be not the carpenter's shop, but the building trades. If I had to guess, and I'll give you reasons as we go on, would guess that he might most likely be a stonemason, and that would fit tekton. So it could be translated, is this not the stone cutter, the stonemason? The reason is, if you think, he never gives one example from making wood ever. He talks about a plow once, but he doesn't say, imagine a man making a plow, but many, many times. How many times does he talk about building a house, laying the foundation, make sure it's deep, make sure the stones are steady, build solidly, and so forth. So if I was going to guess, I would say stonemason might be a good guess. Now, just to the north of Nazareth, is that megapolis called Sepphoris. I put the Hebrew name because if you go to Israel, you might have trouble finding it if you talk to Israelis and say, do you know where Sepphoris is? Because they might not know the English name. It's Tzipori. It means little bird up on a hill. So it's a place where birds would maybe perch up on a hill. But the name that we know it by historically is Sepphoris. It's a Roman city. It was built long before the time of Jesus. It was expanded by the Hashmoneans, which are about 150, 200 years before Jesus. And what about it? Well, this map, the same map again. Here's Nazareth, here's Jaffa. But notice Sepphoris. That's only about 3.5, 4 miles to the north. So don't let the map fool you. Look at your scale of miles here. It's very, very short. I've excavated at Sepphoris. I'm going to talk about that. So I'm picturing Jesus, and I can't prove this, but when you go on the ground and you look, as I'm going to show you, if he's working in the building trades, there's something about Sepphoris you need to know. And that is, it was utterly destroyed and burnt down in the year 4 BC. Now, why would that matter? Herod the Great dies in 4 BC. Jesus is born the previous year in 5 BC, we think. Mary and Joseph have gone back to Nazareth. Why was Cephas destroyed in 4 BC? Because when Herod the Great died in 4 BC, 3 revolts broke out, and one of them particularly was centered in the north in the Galilee, led by one named Judas. And he broke into the armory at Sepphoris. It's a major urban center under Roman jurisdiction with legions up to the north here watching. It's the capital of Galilee. Josephus, the historian I mentioned earlier, he says it's the jewel of all Galilee. It's a beautiful city. And the Romans, in punishment to the rebels and putting down the revolt, they burnt the city to the ground, which means that all during the time Jesus was growing up, when he was a teenager, when he was into his 20s and 30s, rather than going to India or Egypt and talking about the lost years of Jesus, according to Mark 6, verse 3, he is in the building trades. And if you're in the building trades, and particularly if I'm correct that you're a stonemason, then what are you going to do if a city is being rebuilt by Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, who took over rulership of the Galilee in 4 BC? I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure it fits the evidence. So I'm picturing Jesus every morning at 4 or 5 a.m. walking to Sepphoris. I've walked it many times with my students. I've excavated there, and I'll show you what it looks like. If you're standing at Nazareth, there's Sepphoris right here. Look at this. Do you think you could make this walk? How would that be? So you come out of your village, over the hill, down into the valley, and there's Sepphoris. This is a Crusader building. Don't get excited. It's not from the time of Jesus, but we're going to go up on the hill and take a look at things and see what's there. As far as the city, I think it went all around like this. And up here, about, I would say 1/20th of the area that could be excavated has been excavated, maybe even 1/50th. And yet a lot has been excavated. It's like if you only dug a few streets in Charlotte, maybe Trade and Tryon and a few cross streets, and the rest of all of Charlotte and all the suburbs you didn't touch. Now, why have you never heard of Sepphoris? If you haven't, some of you haven't, because it's not in the New Testament. Nazareth is in the New Testament, not Sepphoris. But historians know all about Sepphoris, and we've been excavating it now for about 40 years. I first went to Sepphoris in the 1990s. I had an artist, Balazs Baloj, that I use for my books. He illustrates my books. You can see his paintings in the Jesus Dynasty book. And I showed him that picture, and I said, draw me, because he specializes in Roman drawings, draw me what it would have looked like in the time of Jesus, looking out from Nazareth. And this is what he drew. And then he drew a top view with the stadium and a wall, which Josephus mentions, and the palace of Herod the Great right here, and so forth. This is what it looks like on the ground. I'm not going to dwell a lot on Cephas because I have so much else I want to cover, but here I am walking one of the main streets. It's set out in good Roman style with the typical cross streets, but notice right here, it's not even dug yet. And will it ever be? I don't know. And notice here, this is the modern surface of the ground, and you go down a meter and you're already at ruins from the Byzantine and finally the first century period. So it's an archaeological dream. I dug there in the 1990s for a couple of seasons. I took UNC Charlotte students, and we basically just helped uncover the urban area. We got down to a couple of streets and some mosaics and so forth. There's also what remains of a stadium. This comes up because some have wondered, would Jesus be aware of the theater? And some have even wondered, would have Jesus have gone to the theater? I'm not going to make him into an urban, citizen of Cephas, because it is a Jewish town, but it has a lot of Roman influence. But I think he certainly knew about the theater, and depending on the date, he might have helped build the theater. So that's kind of exciting. But one thing he does say in the Sermon on the Mount, he starts calling people hypocrites, right? We all know that. You hypocrites, you say this and you do that, talking to some of his enemies of the Jewish establishment. That word in Greek, hypocrites, means actor. That's what it actually means. So when we say hypocrite, we're not translating the word, we're transliterating it. It sounds the same as the Greek word, hypocrites, and it means play actor. So if he's teaching around the Galilee, I think he refers to this city. For example, he says once, in the Sermon on the Mount, a city set on a hill cannot be hid. I'm thinking he grew up in Nazareth. He's looking to the north. He sees the city on a hill, all lit up at night. And he says a city on a hill can't be hid. Cephas is going to be seen all over the valley. And then he says, you play actors, you're just a bunch of play actors. Maybe he's addressing his audience. I don't know, but it's interesting. We're going to go then from Nazareth to Cephas to Capernaum. Literally, it's Capernaum. If you've heard of the book of Nahum in the Bible, Kafar means village, village of Nahum the prophet. So you might not have known that people say Capernaum, Capernaum, it's in the New Testament, but it actually goes back to the prophet Nahum. Now, take a look at this map, because I want you to notice when the water levels back in the 80s began to sink and into the 90s, the water went way, way down, and these ancient docks began to appear. You see the blue-green color here. Look at the dock of Capernaum compared to Gennesaret, which we're going to talk about, Magdal, where Mary Magdalene we think is from, even Tiberias. So remember I said Jesus is strategic? He leaves Nazareth, he goes down and is baptized by John, and we'll pick up on that story in a minute. But after his baptism and his temptation in the desert, he goes and he moves his mother and his brothers, because he's head of the family. Joseph seems to have died or disappeared somehow. I would assume he might have died. And Jesus is now head of the household. And he's got his 4 brothers and his 3 or more sisters and his mother to take care of. And he goes to Capernaum, and he settles in that village, which is the town of Peter and Andrew and James and John, at least in terms of where they're living. We think they might have been born or actually from Bethsaida, which is up here, but Capernaum is where Jesus makes his headquarters. Here's the Sea of Galilee. You might have never seen a picture of it. I am not in a boat. I took this actually from one shore to the other. So we would think of it more as a large lake, and you can see how it's shaped like a kind of an hourglass. This is an attempt by an artist to represent what that dock might have been like and what these houses might have been like. And the artist has actually put in the synagogue, you see right here, which we're going to look at. It's been excavated. And this complex right here is representing Peter's house. If it is Peter's house, and we'll talk about that, and I think it has good reason to be thought to be Peter's house. Jesus sets up his headquarters with his family in the most strategic area of the Galilee, right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And the synagogue is right here. So this is the center of Capernaum. Here's another drawing by Beloge, my artist, as to what it might look like. And again, here's the synagogue from another view. And this would probably be Peter's house. This little bay here is where Jesus got out on the boat and preached, remember? I've taken my students here and got in a boat about this far and said, can you hear me? And it's a perfect little amphitheater just north of Capernaum. It's fun to do. This is Beloge's painting of what Peter's house might have looked like in the first century. Again, lakeside property, fishing business. These people are making a good living. So don't think of Jesus, if he's a stonemason, he's making a wage, he's trained, he has his brothers, has his father initially. This is what it looks like, not today, but in 1979. I took this picture in 1979 from a balloon kind of craft because I wanted to get a shot of it. You can see the bay over here. This is what was left of the synagogue after excavation. This is the synagogue, sorry. This is what's left of Peter's house. You can see a lot of it hasn't been excavated, but this is the close-up of Peter's house. What's happened is an octagon church has finally been built around it, and that actually preserved it. Today, there's a huge Catholic church built over Peter's house for devotional reasons. People want to come and worship there. So you can't see what you could see when I took this slide in 1979. The foundation of the synagogue is this black basalt, and it's very similar in dimensions to this later building, which we think is 4th or 5th century. So even though tourists go and say, oh, the synagogue of Jesus, and it's much later, they're not in the wrong place. You see the excavations here have showed the road from the 1st century and the foundations. So I think it's got good evidence. Do you remember the story in, I think it's in Mark 2, where Jesus is in the house of Peter and it's all crowded and nobody can get in and they're out in the alleyways and so forth. And there's a man who's paralyzed that they let down through the roof. Here's a roof at Nazareth Village. It's not at Capernaum, but just to show you how the roof was made, it's been constructed exactly like a 1st century roof. Kind of gives you the idea with the beams, the straw, and then it was plastered over at the top with mud. This is a little complicated, but you see these gray lines right here? Those are the lines that remain of Peter's house, 1st century, if it is Peter's house. And then you see the different things that were built later, including a church with an apse and a baptistry, and you can see the octagon shape that exists now. So why is this important? Well, first of all, it's amazing to go there. And we can, even though the church is built over it, you can get under the church. You can't go inside, but you can look and see this firsthand and to think, and then you can walk down to the shore right here, just outside the door of the house, so to speak. And you can see how look how the water's gone down. It's exposing the modern dock and then possibly the ancient dock. We don't know the exact date of this. The last time I was there in March last year, right before COVID. I barely made it out of the country before COVID hit. And guess what? The water was all the way back up here again. So we had a lot of fun the year we were there. This was in 2019 because we were picking up pottery and coins and everything that, if you can go to a lake that has gone down, you can find everybody. Well, of course, Coke bottle cans too, but lots of ancient things. It was fun. Back in the year, I'm trying to think of the year now. I didn't write it down, but I think it was, I might have it somewhere else. No. Anyway, I think it was in the 80s or 90s. I think it was in the 80s. I should have written it down. Because the water went down so much, the hull of a boat was discovered. This is just a reconstruction of it, but this is the actual boat. It's not the whole boat, but from the boat, you can kind of reconstruct what the Jesus boat would have looked like that he might have sailed in the time of Peter, what Peter's boat might have looked like. And here you have actually a reference to one of the boats in the Gospel of Luke where he goes out in the boat. So if you ever go to Israel with me or somebody else, they'll probably let you see this boat. Christians call it the Jesus boat. Of course, there were hundreds of boats. This is the only one found, but it did carbon date to the 1st century. Most archaeological discoveries are accidental. I'm going to tell you about quite a few today. Now, prepare the way in the desert. Let's go down to the desert. Jesus goes and is baptized, and John the Baptist is baptizing up and down the Jordan River. And we know around the northwest side of the Dead Sea were the Dead Sea Scrolls. So here's the big map, and here's a close-up. Many of you know about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm not connecting this archaeologically to Jesus because I don't know if Jesus ever went to Qumran. Many scholars think John the Baptist might have grown up at Qumran or had something to do with Qumran. This is the ancient settlement where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. You can see how well preserved they are. This is my favorite, the Isaiah scroll. That's actually a thumbprint of an ancient person that left from the oil of their fingers. There's also some marks like this. This is Isaiah 53 that talks about the suffering servant being wounded for our transgressions, wounded for our iniquities, which many Jews take to be the people of Israel, many Christians take to be Jesus. But this copy, 200 BC, previously the oldest copy of Isaiah was Middle Ages, about 900 AD or CE. It's just amazing. The Dead Sea Scrolls are exciting. Now, my students always ask me this. Could Jesus have visited Qumran and read from that Isaiah scroll? Notice the could. What am I going to say? Of course he could have. Did he? I don't know. Is that his thumbprint? Let's don't even go there. Here's the settlement. It's monastic. It's all male. This is a cemetery, over 900 graves. As far as we know, they're mostly male. They found a few women on the outskirts, but they think they're later burials. They're buried from north to south rather than east to west because this group is looking to the Galilee. I think that's why. So that when the resurrection comes, they'll raise up and look to the north. That's my, at least, supposition. This is not a lecture on the Dead Sea Scrolls, so I got to go on, but here's their assembly. These are the caves where the scrolls were found. As you can see, they're closely associated with the assembly. Now, my greatest discovery, I'm going to tell you about now, I call it the Jesus Hideout. And we're going to talk about this area of the Galilee again. When Jesus, the last week of his life, look, I just jumped from baptism to the last week of his life, because that's where all my archaeology comes in. This is Mount Tabor, nothing to do with me, right? Sort of, because my family is Czech, and in Czech Republic, there's a Tabor, Czech Republic. It's the second largest city in the Czech Republic, and it's named Tabor because it's supposed to be the new Mount Tabor. They got it out of the Bible. So I guess it does have to do with me. But anyway, here I am at Nazareth looking at Tabor. So in the Middle Ages, when pilgrims had come to the Holy Land, they wanted everything close. So they go to Nazareth and they go, oh, well, where was Jesus transfigured? Remember the transfiguration, Mark 9, Matthew 16, and so forth? You go, oh, right here, it says he went to a high mountain. It's probably Mount Tabor. So this is called the Mount of Transfiguration. If you read the text carefully, it says he went way up to the north, okay? So here, he goes all the way up here to a high mountain. He wants to get away. So here he is. He's been teaching and preaching in all the villages of Galilee, and he goes all the way up here. And I think probably somewhere in this area that we call Mount Hermon is really the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, I'm going to talk about my discovery. After he went way up, he starts heading back down, and I'll show you on a map. And we read that John was baptizing when Jesus is baptized. This is John 3 at Anon Salim. And Jesus is baptizing in Judea. I don't know if you ever noticed that. Jesus teams up with John. They're both baptizing. Now notice this. Elijah, I jump to Elijah, is told to go and depart and hide east of the Jordan in the brook Kerith. If you look here, we read that Jesus went away across the Jordan east. It doesn't say east, but it's to the place where John had been baptizing first, and there he remained. Years ago, it was in 1992, I was teaching this in my class at UNC Charlotte, and I said to the students, I hadn't really noticed, I said, wait a minute, I know where Anan Salim is. And I threw this map up. Here it is, Anan Salim. I hope you can see that okay. And that's where John is baptizing in this passage. Here's the brook Kerith where Elijah hid. And I said, if he crosses into the area of the brook Kerith, it's called in the Old Testament, then he's hiding like Elijah. Why is he hiding? Because Herod wants to kill him. He's just heard that John the Baptist has died. He now has heard that Herod Antipas, who killed John the Baptist, wants to kill him. And he's up here in Cephas. And Jesus crosses over. This is the last winter of his life. It's in December of the year 29. Here's a map that shows you Salim. And I want you to notice this is Herod's territory. This is not Herod's territory. When you cross right here, you're not in the Decapolis. You're into this area of just, actually, this is the border of the brook Kerith. If you're on the north side, you're not in Herod's territory. I drew this on a map. I drew this just to show you how he swoops around like this and then heads to Jerusalem. So I went there. Literally, that I was teaching in May, and I asked 4 of my students. This wasn't a trip abroad, like study abroad. This is just me. It said, I'm going to Jordan, and I'm going to see if I can find this place. I've never been there. And 4 of my students went over, and we found the brook Kerith. It's called Wadi al-Yabash. This was the view we got as we first came up to it. Can you imagine me jumping up and down? This, and it's completely secluded. And as you go in deeper and deeper, it gets like this. And we're trying to follow it. And it has waterfalls and so forth. And so I had my artist Beloge draw Jesus and his entourage. And I said, put the women in, put the sisters in. I wish he had put 30 or 40 people because they're headed for Jerusalem. Jesus is going to die in April. This is December. According to the Gospel of John, he spent the last winter of his life. If I was ever writing a novel of Jesus, I would call it The Last Winter. Don't steal my idea. But anyway, I can't tell you how excited I was to go visit this. I've been back 4 other times. We've collected pottery. We've gone in the caves. We've just tried to imagine. And there could be some excavating done in some of those caves. And some of it has been done, but not by me. Also, what about Jesus is baptizing in Judea? We read in the Gospel of John, right? John's up north by Anan Salim. Jesus is in Judea. Who ever heard of Jesus baptizing in Judea? He apparently is more successful with numbers down in Judea than up in the north. And where is he baptizing? It's not in the city of Jerusalem. It's in the hill country of Judea, where John the Baptist is from, is what we think. So in the year 2000, Shimon Gibson, who I tip my hat to if he's listening or listens later, he called me. I didn't know him. I had heard his name. I think he had heard my name. He says, Tabor, I heard you work a lot on John the Baptist and history, and you also do archaeology. Guess what I found? I found at Suba, 15 miles outside of Jerusalem, west of Jerusalem, a cave. And the cave has the oldest art, we think. You call it Christian art, Judeo-Christian art, the oldest art ever found related to the Jesus movement. I didn't want to believe him. I said, you're kidding. I mean, I know of Byzantine art and later art, but how old do you think it is? He said, it could be 1st century, 2nd, 3rd, I don't know. Let's dig the cave. The cave is filled all the way up. It made the cover of Bar magazine. You can look this up. John the Baptist, has his cave been found? We're going to publish a major volume this summer on our excavations. We've been working on this volume for years. This is what it looks like. John the Baptist was born and grew up at Ein Kerem, just over where I have my cursor up the hill. And this is our cave area. You see where our tents are set up and our tarps and so forth. And the road is going through. And there's a natural spring and a cave here that we got very excited about. When we first went in, look at this. And my hair was not gray. This was in the year 2000. The chancellor let us go in the semester break, and then we went back spring break. And we are starting right at the ground level as it existed. We're inside the cave. can't stand up, and we take it all the way down. Here's Dr. Gibson looking his young self 21 years ago. And notice the soil when we started was right here. You saw it. And we found this glorious entrance, and it was built during the Iron Age. And we put this gate up, and let me take you inside. And on the walls, we discovered, and actually the kibbutz people, it's a kibbutz, Suba, they found it, but Shimon and I and our team, Rafi Lewis, we identified it. We think this is John the Baptist. See his little garment hacked to be, he's raising his staff and he's preaching, and he's got his hair all up. He's a Nazarite, so he never cut his hair, so his hair's all up in a bun. This could even be a mitre or a crown because he's a priest, so it might even be his priestly crown. We think probably a relic was put here, maybe that the Christians had a relic from John the Baptist. This little bird here, we think is a basin maybe that he used to pour water. We think he immersed, but also you can pour water over the head to make sure everything gets completely covered with water. Also, we think a platter with a sword and his head. It's been defaced by later iconoclasts, whether maybe Byzantine or even Islamic zealots who don't want any graven images, even though it's not a graven image, it's kind of an etch. So the John the Baptist cave, Shimon drew this drawing to show you how people would come in. This is actually what it looks like. They would anoint their feet with maybe oil, and then would go into the pool and get baptized. Did Jesus baptize there? I don't know, but we do know that it's a huge public mikveh or place of water purification. And guess what? First century pottery all over this level. So it was inhabited in the first century. Certainly John the Baptist knew about it. He might have said to Jesus, you need to go down to Suba and baptize. Here's a couple of young men 21 years ago looking fit and famous after we dug the cave. My favorite picture. Okay, now we're going to go down to Jerusalem. When you get to Jerusalem, it starts looking like this. This is Balaj again. I said, you know, modern Jerusalem, it's like a headache. There's all kinds of modern buildings and apartments and wires and telephone lines and streetcars, and, you know, you can't imagine what it was like. What was it like in the first century as you came in from the main roads, north, south, and so forth? This would be coming in from the west. Herod's palace right here. Mount Zion, we're going to talk about, a residential area here called the Upper City, the Lower City, and Herod the Great's great and magnificent temple, and then a northern extension of the city. One possibility of Jesus being crucified would be right outside this area right here. Later, this wall was extended and brought down, but the Church Holy Sepulchre, we'll talk about that in a minute. Here's another drawing that kind of gives you a more spatial view of what it might be like. The temple, I would be taking this from one of the mansions up on the hill, or even an air balloon in the time of Jesus. Looking down on Herod's palace, the towers, the foundations of these towers are still there today. If you've been to Jerusalem, raise your hand. Some of you, you've been to Jaffa Gate, and you probably entered right through this gate and you saw the base of these towers. Temple Mount, this is the western wall where people pray. They would be more up in this area, but they would be way up here in the air in terms of where we are today. In other words, you'd be standing up here. And of course, all this was torn down by the Romans in the summer of 70. But Jesus goes to Jerusalem. Here's something of what it looks like. These excavations here I'm going to talk about, because these steps that you can see here did go up to the temple. These gates actually went into the temple. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque that the Muslims built in the 7th century AD. This is the Dome of the Rock. Now, this is not a mosque. Everybody thinks it's a mosque. You could say it's a Muslim shrine, but it's really a house of prayer for all people. That's what it's supposed to be. It's Abrahamic faith. There's a lot of tension now politically, and the Muslims who control it don't let tourists go in. years ago, not that many years ago, even 10 years ago, anyone could go in, and it's a beautiful shrine covering the rock where traditionally Abraham offered Isaac or Ishmael, depending on your tradition. But what you can see is the platform of Herod the Great's temple. You can still see that today. So this is pretty well still holding to the dimensions. So it's very exciting. All kinds of archaeology. I could talk forever, but people always want to ask me, Dr. Tabor, if we go to Jerusalem, students, other people who travel with me, they ask, is there any place where we can be sure first century people walked? If they're Christian, they're thinking of Jesus. If they're Jewish, they're probably thinking of Rabbi Hillel. Maybe they're thinking of the Apostle Paul, who grew up in Jerusalem and went to school there. See these steps? These have been reconstructed, but look at these. These are bedrock steps. These are the steps going right here up into the temple. How many times would Jesus have walked up these steps? Well, pious Jews go to the temple at least 3 times a year during festivals, Passover, Pentecost, and Feast of Tabernacles, or Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as they're called in Hebrew. And these stones, these ashlars, are Herodian, and you can even see the outlines of the gates. They don't show so much in this picture, but these steps would have been used by everyone in the first century until the Romans destroyed it. Now, let's talk about Jesus' last days in Jerusalem. I want to call your attention to this area. This particular map, if you look at this tan area here, that's Jerusalem. Let me just get a sip of water here. I'm trying to talk fast. That's Jerusalem today, but these are the walls in the time of Jesus all the way down, as I showed you in that first picture. So I'm going to talk about Mount Zion right here, which was inside the city of Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. Okay, I've got to speed up. Again, you look at a modern picture, you're going to get the video. You'll be able to pause it and take a look and zoom in. But this would be that Mount Zion area right there today with the road going around it. It's a little hard to orient yourself at first when you first see this. But this would be going into Jaffa Gate right here, and this would be the Mount Zion area. Now, Church of the Apostles found out Mount Zion. You can look this up, May, June 1990. It's on my website, jamestabor.com. You won't even have to go looking for it. You can Google it on the website and find it. Bargill Pixner wrote the article. He was convinced that the Last Supper was in this building on Mount Zion that's now called the Cenacle, the room of the Last Supper. Down below is the tomb of David. Up above is the Last Supper. We know this building is medieval. However, these foundation stones, you see how different these are? These are of an earlier building that was destroyed. And if you read Pixner's article, you get the whole history. And some of these ashlars and stones could have even been Herodian, but certainly the Byzantine period, which Byzantine, by the way, is like 3rd, 4th, 5th century, that era time. And here's the back of it. You can actually see how these stones go up. And so even though Christians are up here thinking about the Lord's Supper, Jews are down here thinking about the tomb of David. Isn't this interesting? The one place in all of Jerusalem you can go, and there's a floor right here separating Jews from Christians. Christians up here remembering the Son of David, Jesus. Jews down here remembering David and hoping for the Messiah. It's an amazing place, but there's some evidence that it might be the correct location. Sean Gibson and I have a student who got his MA a few years ago. He wrote his dissertation, published it as a book. He teaches for us now at UNC Charlotte. He's a lecturer in Christian origins, Dave Clausen, wonderful guy. I've got to turn off, I set a little alarm where I would watch my time. And you can Google this book and find it easily. I highly recommend it. It's readable, it's wonderful, and it argues that this might indeed be the site. We have done some archaeology there, but I think there's a lot of the future, and so I just want you to be aware of that. Now, here's where we've really done some digging. Gibson and I, starting really in the year 2000, look, this is that area south. This is Mount Zion. When you're there, you think you're outside the wall. Look at this picture. We're digging right here. This is before the dig. And you see, this is the Turkish Wall. So if I go back here to show you, this wall didn't exist in the time of Jesus. This was an urban area going all the way down. It's the rich area of Jerusalem. If Jesus ate the Last Supper in the Mount Zion area, he's hanging out with the rich and famous. He has a wealthy patron who makes his house available. Read the Gospel of Mark. Go into this city, you'll see a man carrying a jug of water. Go in, tell the master of the house, my teacher wants his room. It's all been prearranged. It's very exciting. So we've been digging, and what we're finding is astounding. Here we are in the year 2000. You talk about a humble dig. And there were some probes done in the 70s. That's how Gibson was able to get us a license. And so now we've been digging. Let's see, we dug in 2019. 2020, we're all ready to go, and COVID shut us down, or we would have dug this past summer. Anyway, you're not going to believe this. This is what it looked like. Our little motley crew, we'd been digging at Suba, the cave, and Shimon said, you guys want to go dig for a day at Mount Zion? And you know, my students, they're ready to go. We're going to dig in Jerusalem. And so we got to dig in Jerusalem, and we just broke the soil. This is what it looked like a few years later. Look at this old rickety fence we put up. I think actually, I can't remember if we did that or the city, mainly to keep people from falling in, but we're already beginning to uncover. We would be digging, if you know Charlotte, we'd be digging at Trade and Tryon Street, the cross streets. I don't know the cross streets in South Carolina, even in Columbia, but you know, we're talking about Jerusalem, the major city. This is what it looks like. This is even still a few years ago, but look, we're beginning to uncover all these areas. And right here is a priestly mansion. We're in the foundations of a priestly mansion. It has a bathtub, not a mikveh. A mikveh is for ritual. This is a wealthy family of priests that were able to have their own tub. And this was completely underground. We cleared it out. It's the only building in Jerusalem with an intact roof left by the Romans. Isn't that amazing? It's a residential building. We're on the lower floor. This family had 3 ovens in their kitchen. These are what are left of their baking ovens. They have a private mikveh. A mikveh is where you go for Jewish purification before you go up to the temple. This group of priests, we think it's priestly because of a lot of things. You can ask me in the Q&A, partly of where it is, but also some of the things that we found there. I love this picture. Dr. Gibson took this picture from a drone, and you can see our wonderful dig. You can see the street. There's the Dome of the Rock. There's the Temple Mount. The gray dome looking through here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You can barely see it. And here's a parking lot where actually there's been excavations here, but this is where we've been working. We could possibly, let me go back, extend it this way or this way. Gibson and I and Rafi Lewis, there are 3 of us that are directing it. We haven't decided yet because we have so many other things we want to do. But it's kind of tempting to just go on down and catch this or go up here to the parking lot and see, because we're going to find more. So I know it's hard to imagine looking at a dig, but you can come and dig with us. But we didn't find these coins, but these silver coins were found in Jerusalem. And it shows that these priests are using the Tyrrhenian silver. They don't care about the pagan images on the coin, believe me. This is 99.99 pure silver, and a stash of those coins were found in some of the Jerusalem excavations. We found this coin. It's the only coin of a young Nero ever found in Jerusalem. This is a wealthy woman's makeup spatula. Somebody thought it was a guitar pick, sorry, but it had a handle on it right here. And so you could dab your makeup on. It's made out of ivory, very nice. Whoever lived in this place had something. The model of Jerusalem makes it a house kind of like this. I love this painting by Beloge. I told him, I said, look at where our dig is. Put us up 3 stories looking at the temple. See, right there. Here's the Mount of Olives. And he said, James, you can go have your gin and tonic on the veranda. It's ready to go. So we're dealing with wealthy people. Now, why do I talk about that? because it's the rich and famous people. It's the enemies of Jesus who ran the temple, to whom he was a financial threat. And you can read my book, you can read Gibson's book, Last Days of Jesus, Final Days of Jesus, and you can read about that. The poor people are down here at the Pool of Siloam. Jesus works with them and heals them. He goes up to the temple. But as far as the Last Supper, he has connections here, but some of like we do know that Caiaphas's house was up on Mount Zion. We think that other of Jesus's enemies, Annas, Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate. I'm going to skip a couple of these. This is Below's painting of Jesus' trial at the house of Caiaphas or Annas. We weren't sure which, so he just made a kind of a scene of a courtroom. And you can see here's old Annas. He's the father-in-law of the high priest, Caiaphas, who's priest that year. Okay, I'm going to waste my time here. One other thing, this is Herod's palace. And right here, Gibson excavated this with, he was only a kid in the 70s. And the soil used to come up here, but it's a doorway leading nowhere. He's convinced, and others are convinced, and certainly I'm convinced, that this was the entrance into Herod's palace. So if you go back here to Herod's palace, well, I'll show you another one in a minute right there. They don't have the doorway, but you would put the doorway on, and Pontius Pilate would have come out of this doorway. These are steps, and he would have stood on this judgment seat. The pavement is still there, and that's been excavated, and that pavement is called Gabbatha. It's mentioned in the Gospel of John. Take a look at John chapter 19 and you'll see it. And this is where Jesus would have been tried, we think, not the traditional Via Dolorosa. So you see how archaeology is changing our understanding. If you go to Jerusalem, most tours would not take you to this site. You need to go to this site. Balazs again drew me a picture. What would it look like? I don't know. This is exactly it. But we got steps going up into Herod's temple. Here's a Jesus figure. Remember, the crowds are outside. They're not in the city. They're outside. They don't want to be defiled because they're going to eat Passover that night. And here would be the Roman setting up headquarters. Romans rule in every province from a city seat called the Bema. The Bema would have been here. Now, what about, I'm going to go really fast now because I don't want to go over too much, 50 minutes to an hour. This is the traditional site. You can read this. You can read all about it. Gibson believes in this site. He's convinced this is it. Most scholars, 90% of scholars would say this is it. I already showed you where it is. It would be right here outside the wall in the time of Jesus. I don't think it's the right place. There's one other site north right here that looks like this. Protestants tend to go here. It's called Gordon's Calvary. And my site would be the Mount of Olives. My site, the one that I'm convinced of. I didn't come up with this. There's a path going up the Mount of Olives and a path coming down the Mount of Olives. I think Jesus rode down the Mount of Olives on a donkey on this path, and he went up the Mount of Olives carrying his cross and was crucified right here at the summit of the Mount of Olives. Here is the very top with the bedrock. Why do I think this? Bunch of reasons. You can go to my blog and type in Golgotha and you get all the reasons. But part of the reason is Josephus, the historian, says the Romans crucified outside the gate of the city so that everybody could see the spectacle. And they did mass crucifixions during the revolt. They did 500 a day. We know a lot about crucifixion. Nails were put through the heel bone. And here's, this is not Jesus, but his name is Yochanan. An ossuary was found that has the nails through the heel bone. These are a couple of other nails that might be crucifixion nail. So it would have looked something like this, okay? Okay, now just a few more minutes. His body is washed. This is a drawing from the United Methodist Church in Myers Park that I love. It's picturing Mary Magdalene contemplating the body of Jesus. This is actually Rafi Lewis, who digs with us, and we're reenacting Jewish burial wrapped in a shroud. This is a tomb in Jerusalem that we discovered in the year 2000 when we were digging at Suba, this is the opening of the tomb. I'm sorry, right here. And it had been freshly robbed. You don't open tombs. They're very sacred. It's against the law. But inside the tomb was a shrouded person still preserved. I don't mean the corpse was preserved, but the shroud was preserved enough that we actually know what a shroud looks like now. And so we call this the Tomb of the Shroud. It's just south of the old city. So it gives us an idea. It's 3 levels. You go down into the inner chamber. These are bone boxes. Once the body decays, the bones are put in these boxes. Sometimes the boxes are labeled. This particular person, we don't know his name. He had leprosy. His hair is pretty well preserved. Here's his hair. These are fragments of what was left. We discovered that by chance because the tomb had been robbed the night before. We came along and found it. We called the Israel Antiquities Authority. They said, go in and take a look. And Dr. Gibson and our team were allowed to remove the artifacts. And so we have the first Jewish male hair, no lice, well cut, probably a wealthy person. We've done DNA for the first time ever on the bones that are left in the tomb. We actually have a DNA profile of a first century Jewish family, which is pretty incredible. Here are the ossuaries. They'd all been smashed by the robbers. We put them together. And this is what an ossuary would look like. It's the length of a femur bone and the width of a skull. Gradually, even these bones would deteriorate. Sometimes more than one person is put in. But this would be a good example. This is not our Tomb of the Shroud, but I wanted you to show you how an ossuary worked. There is on the Mount of Olives, where Jesus was crucified, a tomb. Dr. Gibson thinks it's Byzantine, so it's not going to work for Jesus if he's right. But it does have a rolling stone, which most tombs have a block stone. So I like this picture because at least it shows you how a tomb would have been sealed with a rolling stone. Over 900 tombs have been excavated. Now no tombs are excavated. This would be from the 1800s, the 1900s into the 20th century. Israelis are now trying to preserve as much as possible. Over 200 ossuaries, many of them with inscriptions. These are some of the graffiti that you find on tombs from various periods. So some of them are obviously Christian. These are all found on the Mount of Olives. This, by the way, is a real surprise. This was found in the 1990s. It doesn't look like much, but look at this ossuary. It's on display in the Jewish Museum. I know you can't see that very well, but the inscription right here, if I zoomed in, is it says Joseph Caiaphas. This is actually the ossuary of the high priest Caiaphas, most likely, who presided over the crucifixion of Jesus. I didn't excavate this tomb. Shimon didn't either, but we're certainly aware of it. It means that people who are known can be found in Jerusalem. This is an ossuary. I don't know, can you see that? It says Shimon. On the top, it says Cerrini. And there is a Simon, a Cyrenian, who carries Jesus' cross. And he has 2 kids, Alexander and Rufus. Alexander is actually mentioned on this ossuary, Alexander. So if you have Simon of Cerrini and an Alexander and an ossuary, and we think this was found on Mount Scopus, which is part of the Mount of Olives complex, I think we're looking at the ossuary of the bones of the man that carried Jesus' cross. So Caiaphas, Simon of Cerrini. This one is the most controversial. It's what I partly wrote, the Jesus Discovery Arrived. There is a Jesus son. This is the Caiaphas one. Oh, I got the slides out of order. This is the Caiaphas one, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. I need to move that back with the inscription. So you can see it. You can see it's sort of graffiti, but if you know a little bit of Hebrew, I think it is Caiaphas's ossuary. This is one of the more controversial ones, James' ossuary. Here I am with Herschel Shanks, who just died a few weeks ago, and we're looking at this ossuary at the Royal Ontario Museum. Here's a close-up. October 202, it has an inscription. Shimon drew this. I asked him, I said, what about these scratches? He said, they're exact. Shimon doesn't do inexact drawings. So it says, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Is it the James, brother of Jesus that we know? Is it another James? Some have even argued that brother of Jesus was added later. There was a trial. It's very controversial. You can read all about it in my books. And finally, in East Talpiot, there was a tomb discovered in March 1980. Here's the city limits right here. There's Mount Zion again, south. And here are two tombs. Gibson again. Can you believe it? 1980, he was just a kid, but he was asked to do the drawings for this tomb and to be the architectural archaeologist. So when I first heard about this tomb, I didn't even know where it is. And I contacted him and we were talking and I said, do you know anything about that Talpiot tomb that had these inscriptions with Jesus, son of Joseph, and Mary and Joseph? And, you know, some people think it could be the Jesus family tomb. And he goes, yes, I actually helped excavate it. So it's not a good Shimon imitation, but I wish he could come on with us. Maybe he can sometime. Anyway, this is what it looks like. Is it the Ossuary of Jesus, son of Joseph? Shimon would argue that it's a long shot because there's more Jesuses and then Joseph is a common name and so forth. But in terms of the cluster of names, there's no other tomb that's been found out of the 900 that we have names of where the names would even possibly fit the Jesus family. If this is the James ossuary, if this ossuary goes with this ossuary, and it is from the tomb, and there's some evidence for that, you can look at my blog, just Google James ossuary, then it would pretty well be what we call a closed case, that this is the Jesus family tomb. I personally don't think resurrection, as the early church understood it, would be affected by finding the bones of Jesus any more than your resurrection in the future, if you believe in resurrection, would be bothered by being lost at sea or turning to dust or being cremated. According to Paul, earliest source for resurrection, resurrection is not resuscitating corpses, it's the transformation of the dead into a glorified body. So let's see, I did okay. I think I'm just about where I wanted to be. I'm ready to travel. I had this trip scheduled in March before COVID. That's my spring break. And we can't do it. That was, 2 weeks ago. Can't do that. I moved it to October. I'm going to go with Ross Nichols, my colleague. Lori, my wife, is going to go with us because she's now retired and she finally gets to travel with me again. If you want to go with us, if you're ready to travel, I'll take you to all these places. I'll show you all these things. blossomingrose.org, blossomingrose.org, write that down. We can put it in the chat, somebody, blossomingrose.org, and you could go with us. I also want to advertise one more thing. If you like these Zoom things, Bass Virtual Spring Seminar, May 24th through 29th, so it's in May. Go to bib-arc.org and you'll see James Tabor and Tina Ray, fantastic colleague of mine. She's dug with us at Mount Zion. She does archaeology, history, and you can see, and it's not this lecture, we're going to do all kinds of great things, and I wanted to mention that as well. So I'm going to stop the share, and I felt like I talked really fast at the end, and I know you must have a lot of questions, so I'm turning it back over to you, Cameron.
Okay.
Or Steve.
Yep. Steve, you're up next.
Yep. I'm trying to find my
Video.
James, I'm trying to find my start video. There it is. This is so much. I don't know exactly. I want to give Cameron time to process some of the questions, but next week we have Sue Monk Kidd, who's written a fictional novel about Jesus getting married and about his and imagining his family. I wish we could talk more with you about your thoughts about his possible family, possible marriage, possible.
Bet it'll get asked.
I know you do. Let me pick up on your very last point then about resurrection and the idea that became a physical thing. And in John, even the doubting Thomas story, which was fairly early on in the development of Christian origins, If Jesus actually was put in a tomb of some sort, what would that represent in two respects? One, in terms of resurrection, because the people could go there and say, well, here are his bones. It's going to be in the ossuaries, in the family tomb. And also in terms of his family status. We were told that it's a borrowed tomb, but I believe in some of your book, you're saying, I think that it's Jesus might have been of high social rank and had a family tomb, perhaps, which would represent not a borrowed tomb, but a family tomb.
Okay, let me hit a few of those because it's two or three things. First, on the nature of early Christian resurrection. If you go to my blog, jamestabor.com, and look for why people are confused about the earliest Christian view of resurrection, I lay it all out. So, and it's also in my books. So you can find that easily. But quick summary. I think the Gospels indicate that he was initially put in a tomb nearby the crucifixion. John doesn't say it belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. That's a later tradition in Matthew. It's only in Matthew. It might have, but I doubt it. What are the chances that Joseph had a tomb, just happened to be right where the Romans crucify? Now, I don't think he has to be rich because Joseph provides the tomb. He goes to Pilate. Maybe Joseph's house is where he ate the Last Supper. The point is, he has wealthy patrons and supporters. A rebbe, a charismatic leader, a messianic figure, they don't need to carry a wallet. They don't need their credit cards with them, so to speak. Now, there's the followers support the movement, and so he could have been buried. Now, I'm not talking about whether there was a resurrection or did it happen or did it not happen. What I'm saying is my understanding of the earliest view of Christian resurrection was that it was not the physical body. As Paul said, there's a physical body that goes back to the dust. You plant it like a seed. What comes forth is a glorified spiritual body that's immortal and glorious and eternal, shines like the sun. It's described in Acts 9 when Paul sees Jesus, he's blinded by the light. Angels come and eat meals with people in the Hebrew Bible. That's called Epiphany. So whether Jesus appeared in the flesh, remember where he eats the meal in John or in Luke, appears physical or not, that wouldn't preclude the idea for a person of faith to believe in resurrection and still have physical remains. After all, if the sea gives up its dead, if all the dead and all the tombs and cremated people of all the ages are raised, according to Paul, they're raised incorruptible. And then you say, well, that's the physical body. Well, why doesn't he describe it? Paul is asked, well, what kind of a body is it? And he doesn't say, well, it's just like your body, but it's really glorious. You know what he says? He says, I have no idea. He said, if all I had was an acorn and I planted it and later I saw an oak tree, I wouldn't have been able to tell you about the oak tree from the acorn. He uses that analogy about planting a seed. He says, what comes up, God will create that. So I'm not talking about faith issues as much here as what I think the first ideas were. People then took those stories of the appearances. Remember, in the appearances, he walks through walls, he walks through locked doors. If he did eat a bite of fish, you have angels eating fish, talking to Abraham. They eat a whole meal in the book of Genesis. And one of them's called Jehovah, Yahweh. And then he heads off. Remember Gideon? They make a meal and the angel goes up in the flame. So this idea of appearing and reappearing, I don't think the early followers were looking to corpses, in my opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of people disagree with it, but I hope that addresses some of your questions.
I think that,
But it's not archaeology, except that he would have then been reburied in a permanent tomb.
Yeah, I get that, and I think that's where we are. I think it's just curious, though, that his tomb was lost to history. That if he had that kind of prominence, that his tomb was just lost to history.
Well, it's because in 70 CE, with all the destruction, in the debris and so forth, it might have been lost. We think James was buried in the Kidron, and in the Byzantine period, they try to locate it. Our tomb of the Shroud is also in the Kidron, by the way. And we've wondered sometimes whether the James ossuary might have come from the tomb of the Shroud. I'll tell you why. According to the Israelis, it showed up on the market the same year as the tomb of the Shroud was discovered by us. And those robbers were there the night before. So it's possible the James ossuary, but it didn't have a sign out saying Tomb of James, you see. So a lot of things get forgotten. By the way, Jerome Murphy O'Connor, great Roman Catholic scholar, passed away now. I taught with him at Notre Dame. He wrote me your question, and he said, James, I just can't get your Talpiot stuff because I imagine the Gospious society in the world, ancient Jewish culture in Jerusalem would be yakking about the tomb and everybody talking about the tomb. How do you answer that? And so if you want to Google, I hate to send you back to my website again, jamestabor.com, Google Murphy O'Connor. It has a hyphen, Murphy O'Connor. Some of you know Jerome Murphy O'Connor, Jerry, my friend, and dear friend. And I answer him. And he wrote me back and he said, you know, I'm not going to say you're right, but I follow your reasoning here. So it's too much to cover, but trust me, I think I've thought of these things and tried to address them as best I can.
Wow.
And everybody doesn't agree with me. Boy, that's an understatement. Almost nobody agrees with me. But we have some new DNA studies in the works. There are new studies showing affinity between the James ossuary and the Yeshua ossuary, the Jesus ossuary. So who knows? Maybe we'll know. I don't really stand or fall on that. I mean, I'm interested in it because it was discovered. And so, and because I had something to do with exploring it.
Well, James, this has been wonderful. I want Cameron to have a few minutes to process some of the questions. So we thank you very, very much. This is wonderful. So much material, so helpful. Cameron, see us through, please.
All right. we have a whole lot of questions and not a lot of time. So we'll do what we can here.
I'll try to talk really fast.
Good luck with that. Well, rapid fire. Do you think Jesus was married?
I think for years I thought no. If you read the Jesus Dynasty, I say this is not about the Da Vinci Code married. Now I've changed my mind. I think he was. And my main reason is Paul mentioning celibacy and giving himself as an example, but not Jesus. When he does give Jesus as an example for other things, even in that very chapter. And so I believe if Jesus had not been married, he would have said, it's better not to marry like our Lord and like me. That would be one argument. There are other arguments about Jewish males of that time who above the age of 30, would be married.
Right.
But
it would be unusual if he wasn't, right?
Exactly. And
it would be
it's possible that he is taking, the only celibacy we know is in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. And then it's not even in the scrolls. It's deduced from Josephus and from the cemetery. I think there are times when people choose celibacy for reasons of devotion, even within Judaism.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was the case with Jesus.
Okay. Let's see. What are the ossuaries made of?
Limestone, soft limestone. It's a single block cut out. The lid is cut separately and fitted. They're designed as you saw. Some of them are plain, some are designed. Of the 2,000 that I could name, right? Not that I could name them, but we have cataloged. I think there are more because people bought them and they're probably in people's mantles all over the world. But of the 3,000, the 2,000 that we have named, let's say 900 have inscriptions. So quite a few have inscriptions. Those inscriptions are our best window into all kinds of things, like how common were the names. James, by the way, is a very rare name. You wouldn't think it would be. It's Jacob, actually, in Hebrew. Maybe people didn't want to be called Jacob, the main guy, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Abraham's not a common name. Isaac's not common in the spirit. I think they're too much. But so the James Ossuary is pretty rare.
Mm.
Jesus' 4.3% of males had that name. But you also have to talk about a mother named Mary, which is also common, but you're going to cut things in half. Father named Joseph, because he's called son of Joseph. Brother James. You get down pretty quick to very few people.
Why would you think Jesus' family would be entombed in Jerusalem instead of Nazareth?
You don't move corpses around like that. The Jewish law, you bury within 24 hours, you bury where you're found. And also Joseph of Arimathea takes the body from the cross and supervises the burial along with another member of the Sanhedrin by the name of Nicodemus, according to the Gospel of John. So you don't take the body up to Nazareth. Jesus leaves Nazareth, moves to Capernaum. He does go back to Nazareth once. I think his father's dead, probably passed away early on because he's never mentioned. And so basically, Nazareth is not his home. And so I think he was buried in Jerusalem.
Yeah. What's the penalty for robbing a grave in Israel?
Boy, definitely prison, and you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And by the way, when Gibson and I and the students, 6 of our students from UNC Charlotte, were walking along that day and found the tomb of the Shroud, it was from broken ossuaries and dirt being thrown all down the hillside you saw in that picture. You know what he was showing us? We weren't looking for robbed tombs. He was showing us tombs in the Kidron, in the Hinnom Valley, just south of Jerusalem, the valley, Hell Valley, we call it, that are still intact after 2,000 years. He was pointing, look, see right there, you can tell there was a tomb there. There is a tomb there. There is a tomb there, filled with soil. So this tomb was freshly robbed. I don't think there's been one robbed since that one in the Jerusalem area that I know of. You would hear about it. It would make big news. Mm-hmm. And they would trace it. They would trace who did it. Whether they ever traced this one, I haven't followed up on. Yeah. But we did get the ossuaries. There's some pieces missing, but not many. So we did get the ossuaries and put them all back together. They're in the Israel Museum. I think a couple of them should be on display in the they're in the, I shouldn't say the Israel Museum. They're in the warehouse of the Israel Antiquities Authority right now.
Yeah. What's the significance of Peter's house being an octagon? Was that typical of the time?
Well, no, the house wasn't. Remember the gray in that picture? That's typically 4-room house with the courtyard and so forth. That's a typical house. The octagon is the shape that you begin to build in the 3rd and 4th century as you're building first a place of devotion for pilgrims to come. There's Christian graffiti that was found in the excavations. And finally, you would have a whole church built over it. Mm-hmm. All of that was destroyed, at least maybe in 363 by the big earthquake, or if not, then when the Muslims come in.
That Jesus uses a lot of imagery that is agricultural in reference. Do you think it's possible that he was more of an itinerant worker?
Everything's possible. I used that a number of times in my lecture. Everything's possible.
Yes.
So I think it's possible, but I think, look, he has a family business, stonemasons. Cephas is booming. Mm-hmm. It's like huge building like going on right now in Charlotte and probably in South Carolina. You can't hardly find a house to buy. So building is going up. I'm not saying he's wealthy, but Gibson and I talk a lot about this. You know, I mentioned him a lot, but he knows as much about archaeology as anybody I know. And we both share the view that he's not wealthy, but he certainly is not some poor peasant scratching the dirt. And now he leaves all that. Remember, he says, if you follow me, you leave it all. You leave houses, lands. He names all these things people leave. Could be talking about himself. And he says, and you won't have a place to lay your head other than a rock. But that's if you go on the road with me.
Sign me up. Sounds terrible. Let's see. David asks, have you considered that the Migdal stone might have been carved by Jesus?
Yeah, that just gets too speculative, and we didn't talk about it because I tried to talk about mainly things I've been involved in.
Mm-hmm.
But Migdal, you remember Capernaum, Gennesaret, where